Dianni is a solo budget backpacker, podcaster, and freelancer who has been a nomadic world traveler for almost 4 years now. She started her journey with a solo trip to India, and she hasn't stopped since. She also has a really exciting journey coming up, which I hope she will talk to us about in this conversation. In addition to her world travels, Dianni hosts the podcast While She's Away, which is amazing. I highly recommend it. Where she interviews women on their travel experience and expertise to help all women who listen live their best lives experiencing and exploring the world. As if her exceptional approach to living life to the fullest isn't enough, Dianni is also currently a freelancer working in content creation and podcast management, which is, again, where we get all of our glitter and sparkle. We will dig into that in a moment. As you can see, Dianni has done it all to see as much of the world as possible and is here to share with all of you and us what she has learned. So I obviously, as usual, will give Tracy a chance to speak at some point. However, what I want to say is for our fellow disruptors who enjoy what we do and who enjoy the content that we can bring in the disruption stories that we share, both of ourselves and of the conversations we've had with other disruptors, Dianni is the magic behind all of that. We developed a relationship with her through some other connections early on. And the short version is, and without any hyperbole, we would never be able to do any of this without her. And so just all of my heart to you, Dianni, for all that you do to support us. And incidentally, as nobody will be surprised to learn, school me on many things related to how the world works, not just the podcast world, but frankly, let's just call it like it is, the real world. So I adore you, and I thank you for everything you do for us. And I'm sure I'll say those things over and over again over the course of this conversation.
Oh, yes. You guys are too sweet. You're a pleasure to work with, honestly. And I'm like smiling from ear to ear, hearing back my bio. So I'm so happy that I'm able to come on here and talk to you guys today. And also that I get to work on this podcast with you guys because you're a pleasure to work with. Just so everyone listening knows, they're lovely. Lovely to work with. Lovely to work with.
Yeah, because I'm sure people are assholes behind the scenes. Like they sound really good on a podcast, all these things. And then it's kind of like that, celebrity thing where, not to say we're celebrities, but, where you meet people and you're like, wow, they're really assholes behind the scenes. So... I love that you actually like us, and we are nice. She thinks we're nice too, so we really are.
I know. I believe her when she says it, and she has not WhatsApped me anything to the contrary yet.
No. And she taught. I also love that Gen Z educates you, and she educated you on what algorithm was, even though you've worked at a tech company, you should have already known that.
I can define the word algorithm. I may just not know exactly what the algorithm says about posting to certain social sites. And notice how I said social and not social media. So I'm learning.
I'm dead. Oh my goodness. That's what I'm here for. I am your honorary Gen Z to handle all of that so that Michelle doesn't have to know what an algorithm does or how it functions.
Oh my gosh.
And guess where I'm going to get the most benefit from this? When the kids get a little bit older, I'm going to be like, Dianni, I'm going to need you to parent my children when it comes to social media. Thank you. So this is great. I love it.
That's right.
The relationship that keeps on giving.
Yes, it is. And we feel like, we're going to adopt you at some point. I know you probably always wanted 2 lesbian moms. So
always.
Our big sisters.
Always.
No, 2 lesbian moms. This is the dream.
Yeah. I figured that is the dream of every Gen Zer, is to have 2 lesbian moms at this point. Back in the day, years ago, nobody wanted 2 lesbian moms, but now we're like popular.
Please. This, not to give too much, my parents are super Christian and I was raised super Christian, which maybe we'll get into at some point. I don't know. But if I could switch them out for 2 lesbian moms, I would be the happiest girl in the world.
I was literally just gonna ask whether you think your mom, your actual mom, might be listening to this and what her opinion may be of this adoption, proposal. But hey, what I think from a co-parenting, and like whatever multi-parent perspective is like just more love. You
It's
just
just
have more
more
people
love.
who love and adore you and watch out for you, and ask you to parent
Yeah.
than their other children. So it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who said you
absolutely.
can't have multiple moms? So, and the way I met Dianni was at Women's Travel Fest, and I tell this story. I think I told it on the pod with Caitlin that I jumped right in the middle of them and asked them about safety and wanted to hear from them, particularly working in the spaces I had been working in. And they were all speaking at the Travel Fest. The Travel Fest brings so many people together from all over the world. So it was amazing and wonderful to meet all these badass Gen Zers, and Dianni was one of them. So here we are. Look at what the universe did. The universe brought us together, and the universe, when we needed a podcaster, showed up through Kaylin's help, and here we are. So tell us what disruption means to you, Dianni.
Thank you for having me again, you guys. And also, I will say that initial interaction, I was quite intimidated by you, Tracy. You're
Why am I not surprised?
Why does everybody say that?
Because you are a powerful force. Love.
You are. You come off very like stoic and strong. But I've told Kaylin multiple times since then that you are a pleasure to work with, and you're actually quite sweet and lovely and have a great laugh and personality. And I was like, I was really surprised because I was really intimidated in the beginning. But anyway, besides
Same.
that, moving on.
Yeah, she was intimidated too, and look what happened to her. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you'd say what happened.
Look what happened to her. Are you in this relationship by choice, Michelle?
Yes, let's veer off into a podcast about consent. No, yes, 100% by choice and cosmic connection and deep love.
Amazing.
That's right. That's
okay,
right.
but you asked me what disruption means to me, and I think, like you touched on, I'm very in the travel space. I solo travel. I've been nomadic for the past several years, and I think for me, it's disrupting what social norms say like is possible for us of what we're able to do and what we should be doing. I really dislike shoulds, and I think part of me, I told you I'm a Taurus, is just that stubbornness to like want to break any way that there's an expectation on me to be able to be doing something in a certain way. And so for me particularly, it's about challenging what women are capable of on their own and in terms of travel. And I tend to forget like how niche of a space this is because I feel like I'm surrounded by a lot of other solo female travelers, and how I see constantly how strong and how brave and everything they are. And then you step out of that space and you talk to other people and you see their face like confused or intrigued or kind of curious about like, oh, you do what? Like how, And so I don't always realize that this isn't like a prevalent thing that a lot of people are doing. And I guess that's how I mainly try to disrupt, and like people realizing that there are other ways to live your life and that women can do this alone. Because 9 times out of 10, like I'll get questions about my safety, and I know we'll get into that later on, but those aren't the same questions that like men will necessarily get when you're asking them about their solo travel experiences. So it's just making this more of a norm and having people eventually not be surprised that this is what I do with my life, but be supportive and excited for you. And I think that's what disruption looks like for me.
Well, I love it. And it's absolutely, I mean, it absolutely is disrupting what people think women can do, should do, all of those things that are very much weaved into our culture and what, I'm sure you also run into people who just, even at your age, are like, oh my gosh, how is this, safe for somebody even your age to be traveling all around the world by yourself. So I think it's really breaking down those stereotypical cultural barriers that are out there, but it's also giving you an opportunity to empower people because it influence, and I'm sure you've probably seen this and would love to hear, is how it influences others to gives them permission, gives them confidence to do it. And, that in the context of disruption, I think about that, like, how is it you have this amazing social presence, you have a following, you're definitely an influencer in this space, is, how is it, sharing your own personal experiences, your own personal story. Tell us both sides of that. How does that connect to this space and context of disruption? But also, you know, I've asked people who do this is how does it disrupt your own personal space
Mm.
in being so present out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's two ways in which I disrupt. I think one of the things that like maybe I don't talk about as frequently, but I think maybe more in my home life spaces. I'm first and second generation Latina. So my dad was born in Guatemala. He came here illegally when he was 15, and has kind of worked his way up to the point where he's at. And on my mom's side, she's Puerto Rican, but my grandma was born in Puerto Rico. And I think it's that one of the parts that you mentioned is the permission, is that on either side of my family, I was the first to go to university. I was the first to, my mom had me when she was 18, like all of these things that were kind of their norm. And now to see me living life in the way that I am, it's that level of permission. And so, not even on a social media platform level, but just on a family level, having like my younger cousins see what I do and say, like, oh, the feeling like they can now, because that was never something that was reflected to them in our family history that was even considered a possibility. And so to see that feels really good, and giving them permission in that way of like, no, just because of the struggles our family has had in the past doesn't mean that this isn't accessible to you, because it very much is. So there's that level of it for me. And also on a social media platform, um, I think in terms of disrupting on social media, it's for me, it's like radical honesty, and being fully transparent and honest about my experiences and where I'm at and how you can do this too. To the point where, like, one of the things I posted last month or the month before was about my income, like how much I'm making. And like I was putting numbers, and, people were commenting and messaging and saying, like, thank you so much for being so transparent, because maybe I make something around the same thing and I thought I wasn't making enough to be able to travel in that way. And being transparent
Yeah.
about like, no, I do this on a tight budget, and I'm not just saying that. Here's like, this is how I do it. Radical honesty, and also in terms of safety. Like, I know we'll get into that a bit later, but I
Yeah.
shared one story of something that happened to me while I was traveling. And it's something that I could have not shared because, maybe you don't want to scare other people or deter other people from traveling in the same way. But I thought it was something important to share because it's a reality of like things that could possibly happen. And it's something that I've learned from. And I want to tell you also what I learned from that experience. So I think for me, being present on social and posting about how I'm traveling is just doing it from the perspective of radical honesty as much as I possibly can, because I think that's what people identify with. Like, they can see when you're being really honest and truthful about your experience. And also that's what feels the most impactful for them, because that's what's been the most impactful for me, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So I have a question for you, because in the context of radical honesty, I would characterize some of the posts that I've seen from you as also deeply personal from an emotional perspective. And I know the impact that seeing that had on me, right? I don't want to make an assumption for anybody else, but I think we can probably, I guess, kind of, think that that has an impact on other of your followers. I'm
Yeah.
curious, when you create content or you display this kind of radical honesty on your social platforms, how does it impact you? Like, what do you think that does for you in a space where I love hearing the words courage and bravery as you embrace, your nomadic lifestyle and this like solo female traveler
Yeah.
persona?
Yeah, I think one of the when you're talking about that, one of the main, I think it was a TikTok that I also put on Instagram, and I posted about being away so much and that kind of sadness of not seeing your family as much, or like not seeing your parents getting older, and every time you come back they do look a little bit older, but you're not actively there to see it and participate in things. Or like, I'm going to be missing my cousin's wedding in April because I'm not going to be here. Or seeing my brothers get older and mature, and there's parts of it that I'm not here to experience with them. um and there is a deep sadness to that, like you're missing, you want this thing so badly that you're partially able to sacrifice this other thing. And I think life can take sacrifice. But anyway, I had posted a TikTok related to that, and it did really, really well. And I had so many people commenting and saying, like, I felt this exact same way when I moved here and, didn't see my family for X amount of time, or that has been one of my biggest fears about doing this is being away. And it felt like, for me personally, where maybe it would feel strange to be that vulnerable, it felt like an opportunity to open up a conversation about something that maybe isn't as talked about within this travel space dynamic. And so I think anytime that I do go deeper and I am really vulnerable about how I'm feeling in this space, it's an opportunity for people to like meet me where I'm at and say, I relate, and here's my story, and here's my example, and here's like what I'm afraid of, because you give them that space to do that, and so it never feels bad to be that vulnerable. It always kind of feels rewarding in that people reflect a lot of times how they're also feeling, and it just feels good to be that space where people feel comfortable enough to share where they're at as well.
Yeah, I love it. Community, right? Just creating really a global community too with your travels, and I'm sure the people that you've met and will continue to meet, and having those kind of conversations that become so much more available on these platforms. Really, it's kind of what we keep hearing, right? I think we're all just in this like desperate need for just more love. So I appreciate you leading with that radical honesty to create that sense of community in those conversations. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's power in vulnerability and authenticity, and I think it shows that. And when you're talking about your fears, when you're talking about things that are very vulnerable or difficult, sometimes there's going to be emotion connected to that. And I think it also sends the message to people that they're not alone in their own thoughts and their own fears.
Yeah.
And that's what really empowers people to move beyond their fears, is seeing and hearing stories of others and experiences of others. And it takes a lot of courage to share. I know you said, it's not that difficult, but it's still courageous. Whether it's difficult or not, it's still courageous to do that. And it really makes a difference in people's lives. And so I would ask you, what do you hope to continue to offer for your audience and for your listeners on this platform, and through your own experiences and your own story? What is your greatest hope of what to offer to them?
I don't know about greatest hope, because I don't do year plans. We just take take it one day at a time. But I think one aspect of how I show up on social media, TikTok, Instagram, my podcast, is stepping more into the queer side of travel and like my queerness, and being more present and vocal about it, because I don't think it's something that I've really expressed openly. And I think recently with the podcast episode that I released with Alyssa, she is the lesbian passport, and she's a solo female lesbian traveler. And we did an episode talking a lot about her experience, and it just made me realize how much I'm not really in those spaces while I'm traveling, and how much more active I want to be in queer spaces while I'm traveling. And it made me really excited for Mexico City, because it is a big major city, and I bet there's also a really amazing queer scene to be a part of, and making that so much more of my identity in the content that I put out, and being more inclusive. And I think it just goes back to what we were saying of like that vulnerability, like, okay, I've shown you these sides of me, I'm going to show you this other side of me that's really important to me, and it's a huge part of who I am. And so I'm going to take you with me into like these queer spaces, and like be more active and vocal about that as well. And that's definitely, and just more podcast episodes related to that, and not just with lesbian or bi or pan, but like transgender, non-binary, different people in the LGBTQ space, because that, like, travel as a lesbian versus travel as someone who's transgender, it's not going to look the same. And so speaking to all of those experiences individually, and not just categorizing all of us as like LGBTQ, okay, this is an all-encompassing of what our experience is going to look like. No, we're going to break it down and go deeper into it. And so I think moving forward, that will probably be a bigger aspect of what I share on socials.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I didn't even know that direction and that side of you. So love that. I love that idea too, because, you know, there is a real danger, not just where we're at, but across the world for the community, for the queer community, and what they face in each space. I mean, there's still places in the world where you can go to jail. You know, people are being, killed and murdered in extreme levels of danger. I mean, danger's everywhere for the queer community, but that fear keeps a lot of people in the queer community from traveling or feeling like they can be open and be themselves when they travel the world. So that in and of itself, I think, is something, we can discuss further too. Maybe that's another podcast, right? Being queer and traveling and just kind of talking about that space. But I appreciate you also wanting to go in that direction and also talk about how it is different depending on, who you are and whether you're transgender, whether you're lesbian, whether you're, whatever you identify and feel connected to. It can be a different experience and really showcasing that, and particularly for the most marginalized. If you're a trans woman of color, we know that you're at the highest amount level of danger and harm that can occur, and really bringing those stories of the most marginalized to the forefront and really helping people understand, but also how important it is to create safe spaces for the queer community across the world. So thank you for, wanting to bring that into your space of what you do, and educating and raising awareness and taking away fear and, helping everyone feel like they have permission and they can be empowered to travel the world and do it on their own without anyone else. So,
of course.
I love
That's
it.
why I'm happy to share it.
I love it. And so I think there's, again, or I don't even know that I have to say I think, right? I know there's so much impact to seeing ourselves in the stories of others. And, I think that's a huge impact with regard to your approach to radical honesty. So, let's get your origin story. All right. So, as we know, at least your origin story in this, super badass nomadic lifestyle. We know that your first, I don't know if it's your first trip. I don't know if I should say your first major trip. Like, you tell us how you would describe it, but you took off to India by yourself, which is not necessarily in your backyard. So tell us about that one.
How old were you? Tell us how it started.
What was the spark?
What was the thing that sparked you and you went to India?
Yeah, I love sharing the story because now looking back, I was like, Dianni, you were really ballsy. Like, you were bold. And
I just would pause there and ask you not to use the word "were" because you continue to be very ballsy, my dear. And bold. So started ballsy and continued ballsy.
Yeah. I guess it was just like a naive excitement to see the world, but basically at that point I was with my ex-girlfriend and we were living together, and I just had always had this extreme desire to travel. And so her and I discussed it, and we were going to do a backpacking trip through South America together. She's Peruvian and has a dual citizenship, and she had traveled there several times. And I was actively saving money because this is something I was really excited about. Whereas at the time, she maybe didn't have the money to be saving extra for a trip. And so months had gone by and we revisited the conversation, and she wasn't really in a place to make it happen. And I think that, which I'm so grateful for at the time, it was disappointing, but I'm so grateful for now looking back, because that is what sparked me solo traveling and how I've continued to do it for the rest of my life. I think for most people you talk to is it was some incident where another person couldn't go with them and they just had to decide to do it by themselves. But anyway, she wasn't able to. So I was like, I'm going to go and do it anyway. But I was looking at Workaways to kind of make it a more affordable trip. And if you don't know what Workaway is, it's a platform where you can find volunteer opportunities while you're traveling. So you can travel on a budget and not have to pay for your stay. So you exchange your time, your volunteer work in exchange for your stay. And I found one in India. I'd found an ashram in the south of India in Varkala. And at that time, I think I had gotten really deep into my spiritual journey as well. So I was actively meditating and reading and learning a lot of things. And I felt so drawn to be there. It was an all-female ashram, so it had such a beautiful feminine energy about it as well. And I was like, okay, I'm going there. Like, and I just decided based off of finding that place. And then I did a call with the person who ran it. The woman, she was Portuguese, but has been living there for a really long time. And kind of just was like, okay, this is going to be it. And I like to say, blew up my life. We ended our relationship because my ex didn't want to do a long distance. I left the apartment we were at. I like packed up my stuff and put it into storage in my parents' basement, which is my storage. And
sounds like Loren.
My dad's got a real big basement and he just lets me leave boxes there. But anyway, so I packed up all my stuff and I left several months later and just booked a one-way to India and had assumed like, okay, if I'm going to go to India, what's nearby it? We've got like Thailand and we've got Southeast Asia and we've got all these other places. So I was like, okay, I can just make my way down and make this into a trip, and ended up doing 3 months total, 4 months. Yeah, it was 3 months through Southeast Asia. And that was kind of my entrance into solo travel, to budget travel, to all of it. And it wasn't really strategic, actually, not at all. It was quite the opposite. It just kind of ended up happening that way, but I wouldn't wish it to have been any other way.
Can you like remember, or of course you can remember, I'm sure, but like you want to tell us? She's not like me. Got it. Yeah, let me think.
I know I've lived a lot, but
you've lived a long life.
What I was going to ask is like, maybe can you tell us, instead of can you remember, what like do you have a most notable moment? Like, was there a pinnacle, a highlight, just like something that still just makes your heart sing about that first amazing trip?
Absolutely. I think it's so ingrained in my memory because it was such a beautiful experience. The ashram, just to give you like a background, it was all women from just a bunch of like Brazil, France, other Americans, bunch of different places. But one thing that happened, there was another girl from Germany. I think she was 19, and she had long dreadlocks and they were beautiful. She was stunning, and she got lice, and we all slept on mattresses on the floor, like lined up next to each other. So some of us were afraid. She was kind of further away from me, so it wasn't going to be an issue for me. But no, we were like trying to help her get the lice out. Like, she got special shampoos and stuff. And I remember literally with tweezers, we were picking lice out of her hair. But because she had dreadlocks, you couldn't really get it out. It would get like stuck in the dreads. And so she really didn't want to shave her head, but she had to. And I had told her, I don't know where this came from. It's something I had thought about beforehand, but it just kind of came out of me in that moment. But I was like, if you shave your head, I'll do it with you. And I wanted her to feel,
I love that.
I wanted her to feel like more comfortable. And she really didn't want to. She'd been growing them for a really long time. She was like happy with them. And she said, and I said, I was like, if you do it, I'll do it with you. She's like, really? I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll do it with you. And so a couple days had passed, and I remember coming back to the house, like the big place we were staying, and she was bald. And she was just radiant. She had the most beautiful blue eyes, but she was so just, you could tell, you could see her face, and she just looked so beautiful and radiant. And I just kept telling her, I'm like, you look beautiful, you look beautiful. And then I went and got the buzzer and we went up to the bathroom, and I did the same thing. And in the mirror, just like grabbed my hair and shaved it off myself. And they were all, I have a video, it's somewhere on my socials, but all the girls were like in there with me. And I remember there was girls outside like chanting and singing, and some of them were in the kitchen making cacao, and some of them were with me like watching me shave my head and being so supportive and loving. And it's such a beautiful memory because it's just such an incredible space that I was in of like support and love, and just that intensely beautiful feminine connection that we have with other women in sisterhood. So it was really incredible. And I was bald then for the rest of that trip and for several months after, until I decided to like start growing my hair back. And then, as you can see, that was years ago. So now we have a full head of hair again. But that was really special.
How old were you when you did this? How old were you when you went to India?
I was 23. So I was like
There you go.
just about 4 years ago now, because
Yeah.
I turned 27
Yeah.
in May. So
Oh,
almost
That
four
story gave
years.
me all the chills,
yeah.
and I just like, I mean, I'm sure this goes without saying, so I'll say it anyways. Like, how could you be who you are? How could you be in this life without having that experience? And how could
Mm,
you have had that experience without the courage to just take off by yourself? I love it.
Yeah,
So cool.
yeah.
exactly. And
Mm.
that those are the things that like make it so, because of course there's hard parts, like I mentioned, you're not seeing family and stuff, but those are the things that make it so worth it when you get to experience that like beautiful form of connection that's available to you,
Mm,
in places all around the world, and at home, of course, but especially when you put yourself out there to travel in that way.
yeah. And what can you tell people about just what traveling the world does for creating within you the ability to be more accepting, more
Hmm.
loving, more
Hmm.
inclusive? You know, I tell people that when you travel the world, it opens you up to a whole new space, and you
Yeah.
thought you might have been all of those things, but then you start interacting with people from different cultures who
Yeah.
with different beliefs. But there's this, and you talk about it, sisterhood and this connection. There is this connection that goes beyond all of that
Hmm.
that you have with people.
Yeah.
So what do you think it's done for you in your journey as you continue along in
Yeah.
creating? How did it change your view of people, and how did it make you a better person?
Yeah. That's such a great question, because I think in the US, I'm originally from New Jersey. I was born and raised here. We we can be surrounded by a lot of fear. And I think that's because people are very unaware of what goes on in other parts of the world a lot of times. Um, because that's what we're shown, like through media and news and things, or
Hmm.
because of just a lack of research and understanding, or having not ever traveled in any way. Um, and so when I did start traveling, it was it was the first time that I was like able to fully see human kindness in a way that like I didn't
Hmm.
know was able to be expressed by complete strangers, you know? And you just see just such a genuine human kindness that people want to share. And I remember instances in Southeast Asia, and I don't speak Vietnamese and you don't speak English, but like you're inviting me to sit down at a meal in front of your house with you, because you're just curious about me and just want to serve and just to invite me. And there were so many instances, like random times in Thailand, in Vietnam, all over, where you were invited to eat with other people, and they wanted to feed you and they wanted to engage with you even if there was no like exchange of language going on. And I think that's the beautiful aspect of it, that it doesn't always take language and it doesn't take commonalities, and we've have such different lives and experiences, but there's
Yeah.
still just like a base level kindness that humans have when it comes to others. And it's taught me that the world is mostly good. And of course we will talk
Hmm.
about safety, and I think there are
Yeah.
times that you need to be careful, of course, especially traveling alone as a woman. But I have seen so much more kindness than I have anything else. And it has
Hmm.
shown me repeatedly over and over again, even when you're hearing it from other people, when you're home or from other places, like, oh, that place is dangerous. Oh, that place is scary, that the
Hmm.
world is mostly good. And even in
Yeah.
places that are meant to be or supposed to be really scary, I know that's when you can find
Yeah.
love. And I think that's you're able to find that anywhere in the world. And that's my biggest takeaway always. And I think in turn that makes you, because you said, how does that make you a better person? I think it makes you want to be a better person, because you're seeing
Yeah.
that on a deep level constantly, of just repeatedly the human kindness, even within experiences that aren't lovely, having people surround you after with love,
Hmm.
and it makes you want to show up in the world that way because you've received that so many times from other
Hmm.
people around you. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you think
Totally
there's,
makes
I mean,
sense.
it's amazing. And like, I feel like it's what I just hope, everybody in the world listens to this and listens to you say that.
Hmm.
It just, again, it gets back to, harping on what we all need right now. I am curious, like, so with that said, and with such like a brilliant and beautiful message, do you feel like there's a very particular aspect of traveling solo that really gives you the ability to access, right, that
Yeah.
like, tapestry of human kindness and connection, where maybe you wouldn't get that if you're much more in, like a partnership or like a group travel situation, and that's kind of your standard go-to?
I think absolutely. I prefer solo travel for several reasons. Like we mentioned, I am a Taurus and therefore stubborn and like to do my own thing when I like to do it. And so it gives me that flexibility for myself. But I think in terms of what you can gain, um, there's a level of like confidence and just ability. One of the things that I always learn every time is that how much I'm capable of. Like I did this XYZ by myself. I moved to this country alone and like figured out how to open a bank account in a different language and like all of those different things. When you're doing it by yourself, you're proving to yourself how capable you are. And it builds confidence in what you're able to do, maybe not just in travel, but in life. Maybe you've done all these things travel wise alone and you're like, okay, maybe I can build that business now. And I think it just teaches you how to be confident in your own ability, to make decisions and move through the world more confidently. So there's that aspect of it. But I think you're able to experience the human kindness that I mentioned more when you're alone, because I think a lot of times when you're with another person, there's kind of like that safety in that other person. You maybe don't have to venture out and talk to other people more because you have that one person who's with you. And so there's a level of comfort there that you don't have when you're by yourself. So maybe if you do want to make friends or you want to talk to that stranger, you got to have to force yourself to do it. And that builds like confidence as well, but it also just puts you in beautiful scenarios where you're able to connect with other people where maybe you would have missed that opportunity if you were with another person. And I think just I have found that the most like serendipitous, beautiful moments and connections have happened when I've been alone because I've been open and ready to meet other people in that way.
No, I think that's great. I think that is exactly the experience that you have and those beautiful connections that you can have with people. And you start to see people, differently through a different lens as well as you travel and engage. And I think that's a great, transition to now talking about safety. Is I love how we were making that transition from a place of most people are loving and most
Yeah.
people are kind, and there are a lot of kind people, across the world. And safety, talking about safety, safety is important. We should all be thinking, we all think about safety even when we don't mean to be thinking about safety, because inherently as women, and if you are a member of a marginalized community, you think about safety. But what I don't want is for safety to be the barrier, the fear of safety to be the barrier that stops people from doing and taking courageous acts like traveling solo.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good place to start from, because people do say that, and they do have those immediate reactions, as well. You're traveling here, you're traveling there. Let's keep safety top of mind. So it's like, yes, we can keep safety top of mind, but let's not let that distract us from experiencing, from having the courage to go to engage with people within a particular community. It's kind of like that mentality that, well, that's a dangerous place, so these people must be bad. That is not true. Danger doesn't equal bad people. So I think that's a great place for us to start talking about safety. And certainly it's an element, it's a concern. It's part of the reason I got involved in this space, is because people are like, there's nobody talking about safety, and we need somebody to talk about safety in the solo women's travel space. But tell us how you view safety and what you think about safety in this arena. And I think it's also an interesting topic to have, because with me working inside corporations, developing safety initiatives, trying to really influence and push corporations to do more to create, safe products and opportunities, and education. I a lot of times get the pushback that, your generation doesn't care about safety really, or they're not concerned about their safety. So why? Or if we talk about safety, it's just going to create fear. And there are ways to talk about safety without creating fear or creating kind of the negative aspects of it. But would love to hear your thoughts on safety as we
Yeah.
transition into that topic.
Yeah, I think what you said at the end there, like that we don't care about safety. I don't think it's a lack of caring. I think it's just um associating that with like fear and then associating the fear with stopping you from doing the thing. And I think Gen Zers are very stubborn in that like we're going to do what we want in spite of that fear. But I don't think it's a lack of caring about safety because I do hear from plenty of Gen Z people, women specifically, who are that's their main concern and like rightfully so. And that's the main concern for I think any woman who's solo traveling, of course, that's always still to this day one of my biggest things, of what can I do to be more cautious, or like you find yourself moving through the country you're in differently because your safety becomes the top priority. For example, going to Central and South America, one of the main things I've heard from other um, solo female travelers is like after dark you're not outside by yourself, where maybe like in Europe that would be passable, or in different in your hometown you'll feel comfortable in their city after. And I mean, I don't recommend that to women ever anywhere, but like
Yeah.
there's maybe places where you feel like it's a bit more possible, where this here now is like a very strict guideline of something you don't do. And I don't like that as an example. It's not a reason to not go to the country because there's those things that
Mhm.
you have to do to be more cautious. It's just being diligent about sticking to those rules. And that's another conversation of like, okay, I wish we didn't have to do this. Like I wish I could feel safe at any time of day wherever I was. Same, of course.
Mhm.
But I think in terms of safety, yes, it is a concern always. But I think as long as you're trying to do your due diligence in following the norms of where you are and being mindful and using resources that are out there, which I know we'll touch on, you
Yeah.
can make yourself feel safer in those scenarios. Um, and therefore like travel a bit more confidently because you're doing what you need to do to keep yourself safe. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, no, that totally makes sense. So
Okay.
tell us, is there an experience that you can share, or has there ever been a time where you felt, unsafe, and how did you navigate that, and what did you learn from that experience, or if there's anything you can take from that experience that to share to help others who, want to also do what you're doing?
Yeah. Um, this is the experience that I had mentioned earlier. And I think it's the only really scary experience that I had while I was traveling. And I did learn a lot from that, but I'll touch on it after. So basically, I was couch surfing when I was recently, several months ago, backpacking through Europe. I had couch surfed in Budapest and I found a man, and he had several tons of great reviews. And I went, and it was my own room, and it was fine. And we got along lovely. I spent 3 nights there. He showed me around the city, all of these things. And so part of me was like, okay, this experience went really well. Let me try this again in Berlin. And I found another person to stay with. And he was older, but he had a ton of great reviews. And it was like a studio space, it was smaller. And he did say, which I thought was a green flag because he was clearly mindful of the situation. He was like, just so you know, I know you're a solo female. Like, I don't know if you feel comfortable with this arrangement, but it's a small space. Of course, you'll have your own bed area, but just letting you know. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And he had also agreed to meet beforehand to have a meal together before actually going to his place. So that was another like, okay, if I don't feel comfortable during that situation, I can just leave before even arriving at his apartment. So I arrived in Berlin and it was quite late actually. It was probably like midnight at that point, which that's another thing. I never suggest when you're traveling solo arriving somewhere at night. I think in that scenario it was the only like bus I could get at that time, and so I had made the exception, but I generally don't tend to do that. And I had arrived at night and we'd went to eat. I think I'd arrived maybe like 9, 10. So we went to eat, and then by the time we got to his apartment, it was closer to midnight. And everything was fine. Like he showed me around. It was lovely. And then we had opened up a beer and we were having a chat. And I was like, okay, well, you've hosted a ton of people from your profile and you have a bunch of amazing reviews. Like, tell me a little bit about some of the experiences that you've had. And he kept hinting at like this one really awful experience, but not explaining it. And I didn't want him to go into detail because I was having a very like gut reaction to like, if he tells me that story, I know I'm going to probably feel uncomfortable. And so I didn't ask or press any further about that specific scenario. But then he went and told me the story anyway, and basically went into very descriptive, graphic detail of a woman that accused him of raping her in his when she stayed with him as a couch surfer. And I think one thing that you talk about, Tracy, too, is like the importance of listening to your intuition. And in
Yeah.
that moment, like all even before then, like gradually getting into the deeper into the conversation, the hairs on my body stood up, my stomach was like and I was immediately texting a friend, hey, I don't really feel so comfortable, I'm not sure what I should do. um and maybe he was telling me that she had accused him, but I don't know the actual context of the situation, what happened. He's probably lying, whatever. And so then I went, excused myself to the bathroom, searched up hostels nearby, and then I came back out, and I was like, "Oh, can I use the bathroom? I'm going to get ready for bed." And at that point I was struggling with whether I was going to leave or stay. And he went to the bathroom first. He was going to shower or whatever. And in that moment, I think I had like a 3-second window, and the bathroom door and the door to leave his
Mhm.
apartment were right next to each other. So I was really scared he was going to like hear me or something. So in that moment, I called a Grab, which is like an Uber, and I had already found the hostel. So I put the address to the hostel in it, and I grabbed all my stuff really quickly. Like I didn't even put my shoes on. I just grabbed them and ran down the stairs and like hid behind a car until the Grab showed up. And then I left, and he messaged me saying like, what happened? You just disappeared. And I was like, I'm sorry. I just felt really uncomfortable and I needed to leave. And he's like, you could have said something. And I think that's another aspect. Like, your safety and your comfort level comes first. And so if you don't
Yeah.
feel like you want to sit there and explain anything to that other person, you don't have to.
Right.
Like, you don't owe them any
That's
sort
right.
of explanation. As long as you're not harming them in any way, I just decided to leave.
That's right.
Sorry, I don't owe you any money. I don't owe you anything.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to leave. I left, and I'm sorry that upset you for whatever the case may be, but it's not my responsibility. And
Yeah.
so that was his thing. And also, too, you don't always know how they're going to respond if you say that in person. Like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable. Okay,
Yeah.
he could react in any sort of way to that. And
Right.
so I had just made the decision really quickly. I think my like fight or flight kicked in, and I
Mhm.
decided to leave. And I went to the hostel and had called a friend and kind of explained what happened, and um, ended up leaving a negative review on his profile. Just said that he was talking about really inappropriate, uncomfortable things, and he like I had blocked him, and he'd found my socials and was messaging me hateful messages, but that's besides the point.
Mhm.
But that was that one kind of intense experience that I felt really unsafe in. Um, and I think the thing that I learned, I always pride myself on being able to travel on as small a budget as possible. Like I can make my money go a long way. And I think at that point I was trying to save quite a bit of money because I was only had a certain amount of time left for my trip and a certain amount of money designated for that amount of time. And I was trying to find a way around it. Of course, couch surfing, you don't have to pay.
Yeah.
And I think now looking back, I would have 100% prioritized my safety and my comfort before however much money was going to be spent. Because now looking back, I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I paid for a Grab and I paid for a hostel. I'm fine financially. Like in the grand scheme of things,
Yeah.
it's okay. And it's worth it sometimes if you feel like you want to be safer, to
Yeah.
spend that extra money to do so. And not making those decisions out of a fear of spending money, but being like, okay, this is what's best for me, so I'm going to do that in that moment. And that was definitely a big takeaway for me.
Yeah. Well, let me first say that I'm sorry that happened to you. Nobody deserves an experience like that. And everything you did right because you prioritized yourself and you did right for you. So, no matter how he responded, doesn't matter. You did right by you and you did the right thing. So, if you question whether you should have told him this or that, none of that matters. Dianni, you did right for by you, and you don't owe him anything, and you don't deserve to be treated that way, and you didn't deserve to be responded to that way either.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry that you had that experience, and every other woman who's had an experience like that. So
I'd also like to
and
call out one thing before like we continue, and just in the story, Diani, that you just told us, not everyone is going to be able to do this, and I'd like to recognize that. But I also would highlight the bravery and courage that you had in leaving the review that you did, like with regard to
Yeah.
this individual, and how that can really impact the safety of so many women going forward. Again, not everyone would be able to do that, but the fact that you felt like you could and you had the courage and bravery to do it, I think is also very impactful. I am, devastated by the response that you got and what you had to deal with after that. But I think, just on behalf of so many people who I'm sure were positively impacted, I'd say thank you.
And
Absolutely.
and I know the important safety tip that comes out of that is my number one safety tip is to follow your gut no matter what.
Yeah.
You felt it, you physically felt it, and your gut was right. And I can tell you, in working in this space and knowing what I know about abusers, sexual predators, those type of folks, that type of behavior that he was displaying and even telling you the story he was telling you is something that they do. And so I think it's you able to follow your intuition and being able to follow your intuition, and when our intuition speaks to us, it's such a powerful tool that we have. Is when you want to brush it off or question it, just follow it. That's what I tell people. And we all make mistakes. That's my number one safety tip. I try to follow that in just work, right? And the direction I'm going to take or what I'm going to do. And we all make mistakes, or we all don't follow our intuition at times. So I also know that there are times where we could have or we should have, and I also don't want people to feel shame or guilt over that, because we can be as perfect as we think we can be. We can do everything that we're supposed to do to be safe, and bad things will still happen. And it's not the fault of the person, who didn't follow their intuition, or maybe they're questioning whether they did enough. It's the harm sits and the responsibility sits with that individual who chose to harm another human being. And so no matter what you do, it's important to follow your intuition, but we also know we can't always do everything to stop and prevent people from doing harmful things to others. But thank you for sharing that story, because those stories are hard to share and they're not easy to share, but they're the story of so many, and so many people can also relate. So it's not just about sharing so that somebody has a tip that they can follow. It's about sharing to know that if somebody else has experienced that they're not alone in their own experience and their own journey. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
So
I'm
I
happy
guess.
to.
Oh, so sorry. I did not mean to speak
Yeah.
over you. I was just gonna say,
No, good.
just to reinforce, right? Follow your intuition, really feel and listen to how something feels in your body.
Yeah.
And you brought it up yourself, right? And in the solo travel space, trying hard to manage budget, to also, the experiences that you want to have, the places you want to go. I mean, I think that is something that makes a lot of sense. But in addition to following your intuition and really listening to that gut feel, are there other tips or tricks, any other advice from a safety perspective that you would give in that budget space, right? So I think some of the spaces you've already called out or that we all kind of understand would be couch surfing, or the volunteering approach where you went to the ashram in India. I'm sure, like house sitting, some of these opportunities you may have to kind of get by on a bit of a budget. Anything else you'd suggest that you've either experienced or had good success with in those spaces?
Yeah, of course, definitely. So all those spaces that you highlighted, I think I mentioned what couchsurfing is, platform where you exchange. People create profiles. People offer, goodness gracious, people open up their homes for you to stay with them. And then house sitting is different because you kind of have the place to yourself. You're taking care of someone's home or animals in exchange for while they're away. So you stay for free. And then volunteering is like I explained earlier. But I think in addition to, not sacrificing my budget, or listening to my intuition when it comes to couch surfing. There's like actual logistical things that you could do. And I think if you still want to couch surf as a solo female traveler, I think it's possible. You just have to be extra cautious and put in that extra level of research. So taking it a step further, if you're looking at someone's profile and they have a ton of reviews, making sure you read all of them, because there can always be like one or two bad ones in between if there's hundreds of good ones. So scrolling through the first five and be like, okay, they have great reviews. Just make sure you are thorough with that. But taking that even a step further, finding another solo female traveler who has stayed with that person and messaging them directly. And like maybe they put, which is a possibility. I mean, you never know. Maybe they put something up on the profile because they knew it was going to be visible and they didn't want that person to leave them a bad review in exchange for a bad review, or for, the issue that I had where, I mean, he ended up deleting his account, which I think is best for everyone. But having the exchange that I ended up having to have with him after, if you message that person privately and be like, hey, I'm considering staying with this person. I saw that you stayed with them. How was your experience? And I think you're always going to get a more honest answer in a private DM message than you are just by looking at the reviews on the profile. And those things can be like, you know, lifesavers for you, or like the determining factor whether you end up going and staying with that person or not. So it's worth putting in that extra effort. Yes, is it a bit more time consuming than just like booking a hostel where you're going to be safe? Yes, but I think there's also beautiful experiences that can come out of couch surfing in terms of what we were talking about earlier, meeting other people, building those connections, and it can be a really cost-effective way of traveling. So if that's something you're interested in, those are just like a few extra things that you can do. Um, with volunteering, it's kind of along the same lines of, I've had volunteer experiences that I've like sent a message request to, that they've just been like, oh, okay, you're accepted. Like, when are you coming? And I think that is kind of a red flag. And I think places that care will want to, okay, let's set up a time to do a video call. And even if they don't ask for it, you ask for it. Let me see your face. Let me see the place that I'm going to. Looking at past reviews, doing the same thing, sending a message, sending the place that you're going to be volunteering to your family and friends back home, or just people that you've met on your travels, because sometimes these volunteer experiences can be kind of remote, where you're like out in a farm or things like that with woofing, and you're a bit more remote. Maybe it's a little bit harder to get somewhere else. So if you're not responding or something happens, someone back home or someone else that on your travels has the location that you're actually at. And also, if it is going to be remote, or even if it's in a city, finding the places closest to you. Like in that scenario, I had to go to the bathroom to look up hostels, to find a place to stay. But maybe you have already kind of have a list on your phone of like, okay, I'm volunteering here, but here are a few different places nearby. There's an Airbnb here, there's a hotel here, there's a hostel here that I know that I could go to. I have the address in my notes section of my phone already like set if I feel like I need to leave. So kind of just setting yourself up for success in that way of like making sure you have all of those things done beforehand, where you've fully vetted and you have resources in case you need to leave. And that way you can go into it like feeling that peace of mind of, okay, I have all my bases covered in case anything happens. And the best case scenario is nothing happens and you have a lovely time, but it's just that preparation that goes into it.
Yeah. No, those are great tips.
Yeah.
And do you have those tips anywhere where listeners can find some of your own personal tips that you have around traveling solo?
I mean, I share sporadically these tips on
Yeah.
Instagram.
Well,
So
maybe
like I
we
feel
need to
like
get together and put something together for solo travelers,
I
you and I.
you know what, now that you say that, I was like, there actually isn't a place where I have all these tips, and that would be a really great resource to have for like
Okay.
solo female budget travelers specifically. Like these are things that you can
Yeah.
do in these budget travel specific scenarios.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can definitely
Yeah.
create
Yeah,
something
we
like
should
that.
collaborate and create something, because I do think, there's the general safety tips, and I have those, and people can find them on my website. So we can also like put that link. But I think what's nice is that there are specific areas where you'll have specific safety tips for that
Yeah.
space. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's really hard to find because nothing like that's ever in one place. So I think,
Yeah.
with your audience and your listeners, I think they could really benefit from, having something that's created that's in that niche
Yeah.
space, that could
Yeah.
be helpful. So
100%.
look at that. I
Thank
gave
you
you
for
an
mentioning
idea, Gen Z.
Yeah, you did actually.
There we go. Let's make it happen.
Thank you for
I
that.
love that. No, I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think there are. I would suggest there are probably a surprising number of other people who would just, really kind of like eat it up, right? Who would really be looking
Yeah.
for something like that. I mean, I consider myself to be, I don't know, a fairly intelligent person, but
Yeah.
half of what you just said, I was like, oh, yeah, I never would have thought of that, or that makes total sense, and so
Yeah.
I can see a beautiful collaboration.
Yeah.
Coming together.
Well, it's basically also just sharing your experiences because, it's part of sharing your story and it's aspects of your story to share, that just helps other people be able to, I think having those type of tips, that might just be the one hurdle that gives somebody the confidence to say, you know what, I can do this too,
Exactly.
So I think that's an important component there.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're closing up on towards the end here. So
Can I
have
mention
to
really
say-
quickly?
Yeah.
Can I
go.
mention really quickly? Sorry to cut you off, but there
No.
are actually two other like tangible resources that I wanted to share really quickly.
Yeah.
And one of them is Equal Dicks, and I learned about this from the girl that I had on my podcast, the Lesbian Passport. And apparently I'd never heard about this, and so I was like, I want to make sure people know, and we can put it in the show notes and everything as well. But it's a
Yeah.
website, and it's like a resource knowledge base, basically, where you can see kind of the status of the rules and things. I'm explaining this poorly, but the rules and things of where each country is when it comes to like LGBTQ rights. So like as a
Mhm.
LGBTQ traveler, if you went to this site and we're looking at specific laws and things in each country, and if you wanted to know if like being queer was punishable by law, or if it's just like disapproved of, or what that looks like country to country, it is a very, very helpful resource and kind of goes in depth on that specifically for queer travelers. And another one that I have started using that I like a lot is called the Aussie app. And one of the things that like you can use it for is it shows you safety maps around the world. So you can kind of search where you're going and it'll give you notifications or show you if it's a red zone, like based on what's happening in that area. So if there's like robberies happening that are quite frequently, or pickpocketing, it'll show you that. And it kind of sets like alerts. It gives you alerts and things when certain things are happening. So for example, I was looking at some hostels in Mexico, and one of the things that I was doing was like taking them from Hostel World, where I'm searching for them, and then putting them in this app and seeing if it's in one of those zones to kind of like better gauge my safety going forward. And some of them were, and I was surprised at that because you would assume that like hostels are maybe in more tourist safe areas of the city, and not to say that those areas aren't safe, but just like that they have a heightened sensitivity, I guess. And so it kind of just helps me be like precautious, like take precautionary measures before traveling. And both of those resources are kind of just like precautionary measures to take before you start your trip so that you feel safer going into it. So yeah, just wanted to mention those two things that I use that I find helpful.